A 3-year-old has twice as many connections between brain cells as a grown-up, and they're jumbled and chaotic. To work properly, the brain must decide which connections to keep and which ones to cut. Trillions of connections need to be checked. So the brain uses a brutal but effective rule. Use it or lose it. With constant repetition, information moves from working memory into long-term memory. Working memory lasts only seconds until the electrical connections between neurons die away. But in long-term memory, the repetition of these currents stimulates the neurons to form new and permanent connections. The memorized information is now hardwired and can last a lifetime. Susan Polgar lives and works in New York City. She sees the world in a very unusual way. Susan has the brain of a genius, perfectly adapted to her single lifelong obsession. Susan is the first female chess grandmaster. But she wasn't born with her brilliant brain. It was created by an extraordinary childhood. Susan is the living proof of an amazing theory that any ordinary child can be turned into a genius. Susan has competed on equal terms with the greatest names in chess, like Garry Kasparov, Anatoly Karpov, and even the great Bobby Fischer. But Susan's genius is no accident of birth. She was once an ordinary 4-year-old whose life was transformed by a unique education. The future queen of the chessboard was hardly born a princess.
That's the street I was born in, where I used to live for the first 10 years of my life.
His home was ever so humble. Her father was a man with a unique vision.
My father believed that the potential of most children is not used optimally.
A trained psychologist, Laszlo Polgar had made a deep study of the childhood origins of genius. The archetypal example was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Already composing at the age of 5, he seemed to be the classic case of a child born with special gifts. But Laszlo noted that Mozart's father Leopold, himself an accomplished musician, gave his son early and invaluable schooling in his craft. Laszlo decided that specialized training was more important than natural talent, and he had an astonishing plan that would put his theory to the test. When Zsuzsa, or Susan, was born in April 1969, the Polgar family experiment was underway. Her father had already written a book called Bringing Up Genius, and it said that genius was not born, but made.
It reads here a quote: A zseni egyenlő munka plusz szerencsés körülmények, which means a genius equals work and fortunate circumstances.
There was no history of brilliant chess players in the Polgar family. Laszlo himself was strictly an amateur. But he was convinced he could train his daughter to be a genius at anything. Just a few months after she learned the game, Laszlo took Susan to Vörös Meteor, the most formidable chess club in Budapest. Susan was about to face male opposition in more ways than one. The club members thought Laszlo was mad, but if they were ready to humor a pretty little girl, they weren't ready for what happened next. Susan began the habit of a lifetime, beating men at chess.
I had a whole bunch of guys after losing to me, complaining. One said, "Oh, I didn't sleep well." The next one, "I was sick." The third one, "I had a stomach ache." It's like was kind of going on in a series. And I jokingly said that I've never beaten a healthy man.
The only man who wasn't shocked was Laszlo Polgar. He was building Susan's training around a mental skill that didn't depend on either the left or right brain. Girls could master it just as easily as boys, and before long, Susan was literally beating men with her eyes closed. It's solid evidence for her father's theory that genius can be created.
I definitely agree with my father that the work part, the diligence part is the most important, and I think that being trained properly, anybody can achieve practically anything.
At the age of 21, the quality and number of Susan's victories against top opposition earned her the official title of Grandmaster. The first woman among nearly 600 men. Younger sister Judith quickly followed suit. Ranked in the top 15 male players, she is now a leading contender for the world title. And there's one more twist in the Polgar family story. This Florida holiday resort is the unlikely setting for the United States Championships for school children. But Susan's attention is riveted on the tense deciding match for the 7-year-olds of the 2nd grade. Yash Prasad battles for the title against Susan's son, Tommy.
He's a fighter. He's used to playing long games. I have my fingers crossed and hoping things will end well.
6-year-old Liam will be next in line. Susan stands at a discreet distance, getting used to a new kind of tension as a chess move.
Like a first place. He played well until the end, and then he messed up a lot. He stepped into a one-move checkmate, and now I'm the U.S. champion.
And our national champion, with 6.5 points, is Tom Polgar.
In 1970, in a quiet suburb of Los Angeles, a harrowing story came to light. It would change forever our understanding of how a child's brain develops. A social worker discovered a 13-year-old girl who was still in diapers and whimpered like an animal.
Clearly something was terribly wrong. She didn't speak. She was completely unkempt. She could hardly walk. She could hardly balance.
Jeannie, as the child was named, had suffered a most horrific ordeal.
We learned after she was found from interviews with her mother, from some drawings that Jeannie made, that she had been kept isolated in a room at the back of the house. In this room there was a potty seat to which she had been harnessed without any clothes, just naked, and left to sit there day and night. She was in this room for 12.5 years.
She had spent her childhood in almost total isolation. Her brain had been deprived of a nurturing environment and left to grow in solitude. The effect was devastating. Jeannie had the mental age of an 18-month-old infant, unable to talk. But to science, she offered a unique opportunity, a chance to separate the effects of nature and nurture on a child's brain. The big question was, would Jeannie be able to catch up? Susie Curtis was a young linguist when she got the job of looking after Jeannie 5 days a week. Susie soon discovered that Jeannie was highly intelligent and extremely curious about the world.
I was really hopeful because she was just insatiable. She wanted to know the word for everything. And her assumption was that everything had its own label. Every shade of color had its own label. And so she wanted to learn the label for everything in her world.
It's dark, yeah.
she continued to develop a huge vocabulary. I could no longer keep track of what she knew. And she continued to be able to string words together. Buy applesauce store, or buy more applesauce store, which meant buy more applesauce at the store.
Oh, Mama.
Let me see. The log?
Oh, Mama.
But the little bits and pieces of English that take those words and transform them into a grammatical sense never came in. All the question words like who, what, where, why, when, never. She never had any of them. Pronouns like he, she, it, they, him, her, not in her vocabulary.
Here, you do it. Put them in the box.
And so despite all the years that I was with her, where I saw lots of growth in lots of other areas, she didn't ever learn the grammar of English.
Jeannie never worked out the fundamental rules of language. Her brain had missed a critical stage of its development. In the first years of life, the main job of the brain is to make sure all the brain cells are wired up correctly. Surprisingly, it's not just a matter of making connections, but cutting them. A 3-year-old has twice as many connections between brain cells as a grown-up, and they're jumbled and chaotic. To work properly, the brain must decide which connections to keep and which ones to cut. Trillions of connections need to be checked. So the brain uses a brutal but effective rule. Use it or lose it. Because Jeannie's parents hardly ever spoke to her, the parts of her brain responsible for grammar were not stimulated and were crippled for life. Jeannie's story did not have a happy ending. She went through a string of foster homes, was abused in one of them, and stopped talking altogether. She now lives in a care home in California. Jeannie's experience was extreme, but her case taught science that once a critical window of brain development has passed, there is no going back. In the late 1960s, America was a divided country, seething with tension. In the long hot summer of '67, the ghettos of several major cities erupted into violence. Many African Americans felt excluded from society, denied access to the American dream. Politicians tried to stem the tide by pouring money into schooling and social programs. But it didn't work. Disadvantaged children were still being left behind. A group of psychologists in North Carolina had an idea that they hoped might solve the problem.
Oh, this is a young lady who is a teacher now. She's a teacher in Charlotte.
Joe Sparling and his team wanted to reach children far younger than had ever been done before.
We had a great optimism in the early 70s that we could really make a difference in kids' lives, and that early education was maybe the way to do that.
The team went out into deprived neighborhoods and hand-picked 111 newborn babies for a unique experiment. They called it the Abecedarian Project. Kay Gattis was a teenager living in poverty when she got pregnant.
I was 16 years old having a child. Didn't know anything about having a child. Yeah, I got a baby picture of him somewhere in here. Here you go. That's him.
Without intervention, Kay's son Miche would have been well behind his more privileged peers by the time he started school.
Once you are behind in school, and once you begin to be labeled as someone who is slow or someone who can't quite do it, people begin to treat you differently. And they lower their expectations for you. And as that occurs, you see kids begin to have the light go out of their eyes.
Craig Ramey and his team believed they could break this vicious circle with science. Miche joined the project when he was 6 weeks old, and Joe Sparling would make sure that his brain was kept busy. The researchers had distilled the latest scientific theories on child development into 200 learning games.
You put one in, you put a blue ball in. Oh, you got it out. Look at this.
However simple, each game had a hidden agenda.
You don't like those all together? One of the important principles of teaching is follow the child's lead, because if the child is into something, that's something they're ready to learn. See mine? Can you get one like mine? It's not a matter of just throwing stuff at the kid. You got it. You basically say, what is this child likely to be comfortable doing right now? What has he got the capabilities for? And then you do something that stretches him just a little.
All right, looks good.
But it wasn't all fun and games for the children. The scientists needed to know whether anything was happening in their stimulated brains.
Okay, now you do it.
It's fair to say that these children have had more data collected about them than probably any other group of children on Earth.
The children took regular IQ tests, and their scores were compared to kids who had not received any special treatment.
We didn't see any differences at 3 months of age. We didn't see any differences at 6, none at 9, none at 12. At 15 months of age, the way that the children literally saw the world began to be different.
The stimulated children were learning faster, spoke more fluently, and had better IQ scores than their peers.
By 2 years of age, the differences between the two groups were dramatic. And by 3 years of age, we knew that we had to get to kids long before 3.
At the age of 5, the children were released into the school system. But wherever they went, they always came back to be tested. And that's when the real surprise hit. They had kept their IQ advantage, achieved higher qualifications, and gained better jobs. Solid proof that early stimulation did have a lasting effect on their lives.
We were over the moon. This was meaningful. IQs were never the objective, but they were a way to measure that something was happening. Something was going on in there, and that translates into school achievement, into later life achievement.
Miche Gattis is one of many success stories.
Very proud of him. I'm proud of all my kids, but he's like teaching me in my life now.
Miche got a college degree and now works in New York. Early intervention had not just boosted the IQ of the children, it had taught them the rules of the learning game.
Some of my friends, they call me smart boy, a nerdy boy, this, that, you know. Nah, I'm not, you know, I'm just like you. I just like to learn. Everything goes back to early learning, earlier education. It really does. I mean, I don't care what most people will say, you know, wait till you get into public school, what have you. No, it starts way earlier than that. And I think had not had that, who knows where I would have been.
35 years after the study began, the results are crystal clear. For the brain, there is no such thing